All right, guys, we'd like to welcome you to the Monsen Engineering 29th Annual Users Group. We'll go ahead and do an on-time start here. We have a full agenda, and we want to make sure that we give plenty of time for our presenters and for questions and answers. Just a quick description of, well, actually, maybe I'll turn the time over to our manager real quick, Joe Lewis. Joe, if you want to unmute and welcome the group.
You hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry about my camera. For some reason, I can't get it to turn on, but that's okay. You don't want to see that anyways. It's not pretty. But yeah, thanks, Troy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Lewis. I'm the general manager of Monsen Engineering. Welcome to our 29th annual user group. I know everyone is super busy kicking off the new year, so thank you for joining us. Today, we have a jam-packed agenda with great presentations, great material. So I think it's going to be a very productive day. And I also think we have a record audience this year. Troy, is that right? With 200 plus maybe attendees?
Yeah, I think as last count, it was 230. So I think that is the highest number we've had, yes.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. So nice work. Thank you, Troy and Emily, for making this a success. Thank you, presenters today, both internal and from Trimble and other manufacturers. And again, thank you, audience, for taking time today and spending the day with us. Thank you, Troy.
All right, thanks, Joe. That was perfect. Appreciate that. Just a quick description of what we're doing here today for those that haven't ever gotten on a users group before. Like Joe said, this is the 29th annual. We've been doing this for 29 years. I think we maybe I don't think we even took a year off during COVID. So 29 years, I've been a part of 25 of them, which is insane, but it's always been a real highlight of our year. As a description, what we try to do in this users group is put together presentations that cover the spectrum of the customer base that we have, whether you're into construction, staking, or cadastral work, or you work for government agencies. We try to cover what the new technology is out there. That's kind of one of our big pushes, and also some different functionalities that maybe you haven't seen before, or maybe that have been improved. And then we also like to try to get some notes from the field as well, try to get some end user presentations. And so you can, see what some other people are doing with, different innovations that they've put in place with the technology. So that's the purpose of the meeting today.
Troy,
We are
real quick. I understand we have a lot of people on the line today. We have a lot of presentations, but what's the rules of the road with conversation and questions, comments coming in? How we want to open up conversation, correct?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. There is a chat bar, and on almost every presentation, there's going to be time for question and answers. And Emily is sitting right here next to me, and she is monitoring that chat window. The presenters have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of time, and so we should be able to get to almost everybody's questions. And it's pretty easy to type in a question there, so we want feedback. This is a users group, and so the idea is that we're corresponding with our users. So yep, good question. We are recording this whole day, and so if you wanted to get some recordings of some specific presentations, we could do that for you. So if you wanted to look at it later, that's not a problem. Also, this does work. This day works as a continuing ed. For those that are licensed and need that continuing ed requirement. We usually it takes us a week or two to get some certificates out to people, but for anybody that needs continuing ed certificates for today, you'll reach out actually to Emily Chamberlain. It's Emily underscore, no, just
Emily C.
Emily C at monsenengineering.com. And you can also put a request in the chat window as well.
Yeah, so when they registered, there was an option to select if they wanted to continue in education or not. So if you did indicate that in your registration, I have record of that and you are good to go. And I will send those out to you approximately 2 weeks after the end of today.
Awesome. Cool. The history of this this users group, we used to always do this in person. We would rent out all kinds of venues, hotels, conference centers. We always did it in person. With COVID, we went to an online format. We did that for a couple years, and then the last 2 years we did kind of a hybrid online and in person. And what we found is that people attend better when it's online. So we would be thrilled if we would get over 100 attendees when it was in person. And so to build to double that number for online attendees, it just makes more sense. So this will probably be what we'll be doing for the future. A lot of people like the in-person thing, but if and there was some really good aspects to that, but just to give you an explanation of the history here. So Joe did a good job of thanking those that need to be thanked. Let's go over the agenda real quick, just a quick snapshot of what we'll be doing today. Our first presentation is going to be our co-CEO or the CEO of the technologies group for the Campbell companies, Jonathan Campbell. Jonathan's become kind of a fixture in this presentation and will be talking to us about kind of the state of the industry and different economic factors. He's our first keynote presenter. After that, we'll move right into some technology with Pete Mestemaker, our product representative for Trimble, and then also some new technology referring to some RTX improvements and corrections. That'll bring us to our first break, which will be about pretty close to 11 o'clock. We'll just do a 10-minute break, let you have a chance to get up, stretch, do what you need to do. Moving on from there, we will also, let me just mention that after every presentation, we will be asking questions. There will be a little online quiz, and not quiz, but more like a questionnaire poll. And based on your response to those, will determine who wins a bunch of great giveaways that we have. We have, as usual, a bunch of giveaways to do. And so we really like you to participate in those polls. It gives great feedback that we will share with you, and also that is good for the industry in general. And if you do that, then you will qualify to win some of our giveaways.
So these polls will be launched through a website called Slido. You can participate in 2 ways. You can either participate online through your device, your laptop or computer at slido.com, and we will share the poll name so you can join and then submit your answers there. Or you're also able to scan a QR code through your phone, and then you can participate that way as well. So have those ready to go at the end of each presentation.
Yeah. And we will be announcing the winners of those raffles at 3 different times during the day. So stick around to make sure that if you participated in the polls, make sure that you stick around and see if you won. There's a pretty good chance you're going to win something today. Although we do have a lot of
230 prizes.
We have 230 prizes. Actually, Joe wanted to bump that up to 250 prizes. But anyway, after our first break, we have another chunk of time that's going to, and 3 presentations. There are like 3 presentations, and then we'll have a break again. So at 12:30, we'll have a lunch break. We'll come back after about 35 minutes, go for 3 different presentations to our second and last break at about 2:30. And then moving on from there, we will go to the end of the day, which is going to be pretty close to 4 o'clock. So it is a long day. We have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. About 12 presentations. So most of the presentations are between 20 and 40 minutes. So maybe there's going to be a presentation you don't need to listen to. So obviously, just to give you an idea of what we're doing here. So final thing we need to do is a quick safety share. So I'll turn the time over to my colleague Ryan Atkinson for that.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for spending the time with us today. This morning when Troy and I were talking about a safety share, reminded me of about a week and a half ago, I drove to Milford to do some training. And if you've ever driven that road from Delta to Milford, there's nothing out there. I think I passed one vehicle on the way out, didn't even see a rabbit, didn't see a coyote, and just kind of brought to mind kind of the importance of letting somebody know where we're at and when we're going to be there and what time we're expected to be there, whether that's a family member or a supervisor. Years ago, we had a customer that actually fell through some ice on a pond, and he was right next to the highway, but he was down off the shoulder, and where he was at was kind of sketchy cell phone coverage, but he was able to text out. Lucky enough, he had his range pole with him, so he was able to stay above the ice. But after his rescue, it took him several months to recover from that, and just kind of brings to mind the importance of letting somebody know where we're going to be if plans change. Maybe a quick text or phone call to somebody, just let them know where you're at, especially in these cold winter months. So thought I'd share that kind of, that reminded me of that drive to Milford, and, we're often out in remote areas working, and kind of important to make sure people know where we're at. So thank you for being with us.
Perfect. Nice job, Ryan. Okay, I think we're ready for our first presentation. Jonathan, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, we can
Okay.
hear you good.
Tell me if this shares. All right, can everybody see that?
It's still loading.
Okay.
Right now it's a blank screen, Jonathan.
Here we
There
go.
you go. Industry
Okay.
and the economy.
Okay. Well, that's what I get for not sending. I tried to send this to Troy and Emily last night, and I felt very on the ball because it was last night, not this morning, and about 15 minutes ago found out that it didn't go through. So they haven't seen this. And so just to piggyback off Ryan's comment of driving safe, a couple years ago I was at a Caterpillar meeting, and I was talking to a guy from the cat dealer in Siberia, and he told me that they have a rule in winter that they are not allowed to drive more than 2 hours without having two vehicles go, just in the event that one vehicle breaks down. And just with the extreme temperatures, things can go sideways really fast. And he said that they had a field tech one time who broke that rule. He was going about 4 hours away, went by himself, and about midway through, his vehicle stopped working, and he was able to place a call, and they were able to go out and rescue him. But by the time they got there, he had taken the tires off his truck and was burning them to stay warm. And so it can get a little wild out there. So please stay safe. We're not in Siberia, but we do have some extreme temperatures and a lot of open space in Utah, Nevada. So when Troy asked me to speak again, I asked him what to speak about. He said industry and economy, and whatever else I wanted. And so I kind of went a little different route. I do have 2 slides at the end about the economy. That's it. So I decided I want to talk about something else. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. But these are kind of a little bit about some current events that are going on that I feel like will be pretty interesting to this group, considering where you work, what you do. About a third of you who are participating today are from government agencies, UDOT, NDOT, groups like that, and about 2/3 are from private companies. But what I want to talk today is about, let's see if this, okay, about resilience. And to start this off, I do want to follow up a little bit on what I spoke about last year. So for those of you who were here, I spoke about how can we get the most out of our workforce. All of us are facing workforce challenges.
It's eased up a little bit, but it is a common theme across the industry. And I gave what I felt was an amazing example of the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick's leaving after 6 Super Bowl rings. How are they going to replace him? Well, lo and behold, they have Jared Mayo, who they drafted in 2008. He's ready to step in. Pretty cool story. Pretty good continuity. Well, follow up on that a year later, and didn't quite go as planned. So he went 14-3, and after one season, the Patriots decided to fire him, let him go. And 14-3 as a first-year head coach coming out of a pretty bad, with not a great team, isn't terrible. But really, what I think sealed the deal was in the last game. They went into that last game at 3-13. They had the number 1 pick in the NFL draft this year locked in. And they were playing against the Buffalo Bills, who had already secured their playoff spot. The Bills were resting all their starters. And the Patriots went in and won that game, which ultimately resulted in them dropping to the 4th pick and losing out on the number 1 pick. And I think that is what ultimately decided his fate, decided that he wasn't going to be the head coach going forward. But, it's an example of how things can go sideways. Things don't always go as planned in our work, in our family, in just life in general. And so as we look at resilience, I want to talk a little bit about what's been happening lately. So if you look at the last 3-4 months, you look at the headlines with regards to weather, natural disasters. We've had hurricanes. We had Hurricane Helene out on the East Coast, which was one of the worst hurricanes to ever hit the U.S. in terms of cost. It was 230 plus lives that were lost. And then we're just wrapping up the LA fires right now, which have been terrible. And so there's a lot going on. Now, I'm in DC at the moment. And so depending on your outlook, you have hurricanes, you have fires, and you have a lot of political risk as well. So there's a lot of things going on. And so when you look at just some of these things, you look at Helene, like I said, you had 230 people killed, $200 billion plus in damage, which is the costliest storm in U.S. history. That's hard to imagine, $200 billion in damage. For context, Caterpillar does $50 to $60 billion a year in annual revenue. So that's 4 years worth of Caterpillar's revenue out the door, if you put in those terms. Here's some of the damage from Hurricane Helene before and after. You can see just some of the damage that it caused, just absolutely ravaged the coast there. Then you look at the LA fires, and you had 200,000 people displaced. Just this morning, they updated the fatalities to 29. You had 16,000 plus structures destroyed and $250 billion plus in losses. That number will surely climb, but just a terrible, terrible loss there. And so, you see whole neighborhoods that were just completely obliterated, completely destroyed. And who knows what's going to happen there going forward. So when you look at the damage, one thing that's really interesting is you have two natural disasters that are both $200 billion plus in damages. The LA fires were over 62 square miles, while Hurricane Helene was spread over 2,300 square miles. So it's not to say that one was worse than the other. It's just really interesting to see the concentration of damage between the fires versus the hurricanes. In some ways, it simplifies cleanup and rebuild efforts. In some ways, it makes it a little harder. Over on the East Coast, they have a much broader territory to work through. So both are very, very challenging situations. And so when you look at resilience, and here's where I think this is really interesting. So everyone here in this group works with construction, with infrastructure. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about is the infrastructure resilience side of things, because this is what you all deal with every day. And so when you look at the characteristics of resilience, this is from a UN study on natural disasters and how to be resilient. So there are 5 real fundamental pieces to it. There's flexibility. So it's how we adapt to new conditions or uncertainties. There's redundancy, having the backups or alternatives in place to ensure functionality during disruptions. There's diversity. There's multiple solutions or approaches to avoid over-reliance on a single element. Preparedness, you're proactively planning and implementing measures to mitigate those risks, and you're learning. You're always improving how you do things based on past experiences or failures. And so as we look at this, it applies to infrastructure, it applies to government, it applies to businesses, it applies to everything we do and how we can be resilient and how we can build resilience into our processes and procedures. So when you look at it in terms of infrastructure, so, you ask what is infrastructure? Going back to that UN report, they define it as a physical asset that delivers essential products and services. So there's the physical asset part of that. Those are the pipes, the highways, the communications equipment. But then you also have the set of systems, the structures, regulatory frameworks, government processes, the technologies, kind of everything that makes all those physical assets work together. Assets on their own don't do anything. It's how they all come together that really determines how well infrastructure works. And so when you look at infrastructure resilience, what that actually means, it's making it so it's the timely and efficient prevention, absorption, recovery, adaptation, transformation of the infrastructure's essential structures and functions. And here's the important part, which have been exposed to current and potential future hazards. Now, you'll notice that it's not to avoid hazards. It's not to say that these things will never happen. We're not trying to avoid them. We're saying these things likely will happen. Something's going to happen at some point. So let's be prepared. So the critical role of infrastructure is to keep those critical services going for society, for the environment, by being a buffer to these extreme events. So you look at Utah, Nevada, we're very likely not going to have a hurricane, but you look at earthquakes. Yeah, we have earthquakes. We have wildfires. We've had tornadoes. And so it's not at all out of the realm of possibility that these things could happen to us. And so as you are all working on these construction projects, infrastructure projects, keep this in mind that these things will happen at some point. Something will happen, and so we have to make sure that we build the resilience in place to be able to recover quickly. There's a strong economic case for resilience as well. From this UN study, they talked about Bangladesh, how accounting for climate change and some of their structural design is anticipated to save them 3 times what they would spend. So they're going to spend a little more than a little over $500 million to account for the climate change concerns that they have, but they anticipate saving over $1.5 billion as a result. And this 2019 OECD study, of which the U.S. is a part, found that for every dollar spent on infrastructure maintenance, that's as effective as $1.50 of new investment. So it's pretty interesting when we look at how we allocate funds or how we look at budgets. It's important for us to communicate that to the people who do make those decisions. And so as we look at the financial side, one of the really important things is that we have to understand that the ones who pay may not be the ones who benefit. So it may be us paying for the resilience factors, but it may be our kids or our grandkids that get the benefit of that. So we aren't always going to see an immediate ROI. We may, but we have to be comfortable with the idea that we are building for future generations. We do have to fund studies and analyses. We have to know what we're building for, why we're building it, but we also have to balance effectiveness and efficiency. It is possible to get mired in studies that last forever, but it's also entirely possible to do them too quickly or not fully enough to fully understand the solutions that we need or the problems that we're solving for. We need to fund operations and maintenance. Like I said, a dollar of maintenance is worth $1.50 of new investment. That's really important. And we need to make sure that the people making those budgeting decisions understand that. Reinforcing for resilience. We need to stay on top of these and continue to make changes to our processes, our systems as we get better ideas. And then deploy new technology. That's a lot of what you'll talk about today, is how can we use new technology to improve what we do? If you look at how we do bridge inspections now versus 10 years ago, how we use drones, that's changed significantly. and you look at the state of U.S. infrastructure, and let's just take our bridges, for example. You have thousands and thousands of bridges that need upgrades and repairs or replacements. How much more efficient can we be in how we study those, analyze those, and make those decisions because of the technology that's now available to us that wasn't before? So going back to that UN study one more time, it shows that infrastructure disruptions, they can cost about half a trillion dollars a year in low and middle income countries, countries that don't necessarily have the financial resources that others like the US may have to go back and rebuild. So by investing about half a trillion between through 2030 could get us a return of 6.5 trillion by avoiding future losses. So again, it's just saying that it's worth investing to make sure that we have the resilience measures in place, plan for the future. And resilience is really a reflection of your preparation. How well you bounce back is a determination of what you did beforehand. So I'm going to dive into the LA fires a little bit, but this is a house that survived the LA fires. Everything around it burned. But one of the reasons, now the owner of this house attributes a lot of that to luck, but it's also how the house was designed. It was designed to be fire resistant. It has a metal roof instead of asphalt shingles, that have tar and petroleum products on them. It has a concrete fence around it. It doesn't have vegetation or large trees around it. The wood they use on the outside, the windows that they use, the insulation that they use is all designed with the idea of helping prevent fire or limiting the risk of fire. And there are a few of these in that LA fire that survived like this because of how they were built. Now, it's also important to note that when the fire's coming, that's not the time to think, okay, now what do I do? The time to prepare passed a long time ago. So we have to stay on top of it or prepare in advance. So let's talk a little bit about wildfires. And so like I said, Troy didn't know I was going to go down this rabbit hole, but it's one that I think is pretty interesting. And given what's happening in the world, it's pretty interesting to see what's happening. Well, let's do with that. So when we look at wildfires, and again, this is a very real risk to all of us. There's a couple things that it really needs to start and expand. So one is an ignition source. How does it start? It could be human caused. It could be caused by lightning. There are a lot of different ways it can start, but it needs fuel. It needs something to burn. It's got to have the right weather conditions, the right topography. Fires prefer to burn uphill as the heat rises. It's got to have the right atmospheric conditions. Is it hot enough? Is it dry enough? Has it rained lately? There's the fire behavior. How does it move? How big are the flames? Does it move from the treetop to the treetop? That's called crowning, and that's an indication that it's really moving fast. And then you have human and natural interactions. How close are we building to these natural fire zones? Do we have natural fire breaks in place? And as our population grows, as we take up more space, the human and natural interactions are naturally, and as we can see, are lending themselves to more and more fires. We're putting our houses, our developments in places where there is a high risk of fire. Another thing to look at is the power of fire. And so when you look at fire's raw output, it's measured in kilowatts per meter along the fire's leading edge. So for every meter, it's how many kilowatts of power is it putting out. So 1 kilowatt is comparable to 10 100-watt bulbs or a 1,000-watt space heater. Okay. Now, a 1,000 kilowatt fire is manageable by crews on the ground. The guys that you see hauling the chainsaws, the shovels, the picks, they can typically manage a 1,000 kilowatt fire. A 2,000 kilowatt fire, that's when you start requiring dozers and aerial support. You need a little more backup. Guys on the ground aren't going to do it by themselves. Now, a 10,000 kilowatt fire, that's considered uncontainable. That's when you can't put it out. You're just trying to limit loss of damage, limit loss of life. It's kind of out of your hands at that point. And over the years, the last couple of years, fires have gotten more and more powerful. So one really interesting example is what was called the Chisholm fire up in Alberta back in May 2001. So remember that 10,000 kilowatts per meter is uncontainable. This fire was burning at 225,000 kilowatts per meter. And so the way they found this was someone in the US government, they're not sure if it was someone in the Navy, NOAA, NASA, but they noticed an aerosol trail coming up from Canada that looked like a nuke, the same aerosol signature as a nuke or a volcano. And it was this fire. And it got so big, it got so powerful. There's a great book on it. It says the kind of energy that does not burn but vaporizes so hot that it will just explode a tree and the next tree and the next tree. And the energy released at the peak of the fire, so the peak 7 hours of that fire, it burned for about a month, was calculated to be that of 17 1 megaton hydrogen bombs, which is the equivalent of 4 Hiroshima bombs per minute. So that is the equivalent of 1,680 Hiroshima bombs in a 7-hour period. That just tells you how powerful these are. And so, that's a picture that's a satellite view of that because it is so big and so powerful. And that started from a spark from a railroad, from a train. So it's amazing what one little spark can do. And so as far as they're getting more powerful, it's impacting where we live and how we live more and more. You have to have the right weather conditions. So you look at LA, you look at their winter this year, they're at 2.5% of their average rainfall. And so it's been very, very dry conditions, which means the vegetation is very dry. It's very flammable. There's been really low humidity. And you can see that they've been in extreme drought for quite a while. If you go back to 2021, their drought conditions have been really bad. And so you have the right atmospheric conditions for a fire to go. You have the Santa Ana winds, which it's this high pressure that comes down through the mountains towards the coast. And one of the things they knew that this wind pattern was coming, and they were proactive in retaining some of the aircraft there. They were supposed to, that the federal government had asked them to return about 13 planes, and the government in California said, no, we have this wind system coming through. We're holding on to these because it is a really dangerous fire scenario. And fortunately, they held on to them. But they had gusts up to 100 miles an hour, sustained winds of 25 to 40 miles an hour. And the rule of thumb is that you take 10% of the wind speed, and that translates into the fire speed. And so you have a 40 mile an hour wind. That means that the fire is moving at 4 miles an hour. And that may not seem like a lot, but when you're trying to evacuate thousands of people, 200,000 people, 4 miles an hour becomes really fast. Or when you have clogged highways, clogged roads, or you're trying to move on foot, or you're trying to move your family on foot, that becomes really fast. The other aspect of wind is that it carries the embers and it carries them onto other houses, onto other fuel sources ahead of you. And so that it compounds the fire spread. And then additional complications, you look at the aircraft that's flying, and like I said, a fire of that scale, once you pass the 10,000 kilowatt per meter mark, you need, or I guess 2,000, you need aircraft, you need dozers. But a fire that size, it gets really hard to fly. You have turbulence, low visibility, wind shear, heat stress. It creates its own weather system, which is called a pyrocumulus cloud. So it's these updrafts and downdrafts. And so you have pilots trying to fly in these conditions that are really, really dangerous. And then it also lowers the effectiveness of those water drops, because the higher you have to fly, the less effective the water is as it comes down, because it evaporates, it gets vaporized, and is not nearly as effective as if you could drop it from a lower point and more pinpoint. So it's just a lot of complicating factors on this. We've heard a lot about the water systems, the fire hydrants that ran dry, the reservoir that was empty. And it's interesting. There's the political side, which everyone's pointing fingers on that, saying you did this, we did that. But when you look at what the fire experts are saying, they're saying it didn't stand a chance. Didn't matter if there was water there or not, because it's an urban water system. It's built for structural fires. It's built to put out a house fire here, a house fire there, not a hurricane force firestorm. And it extended it just overwhelmed the water system. You know, and you look at some of the limiting factors on that. You had topography and gravity. So one of the issues where the hydrants were running out was on uphill, as where they're trying to fight these. And you have this massive drain on the water system and on the pressure. You know, it's really hard to pump water uphill if there's pressure being used everywhere. You have the pipe capacity. It was not built for fires of this size. It was built for a single house here or there. The water storage capacity, they had 3 million gallon tanks ready to go. Those were full, but that ran out really quick. And then the Santa Ynez Reservoir that holds 117 million gallons of water, that was being worked on. That was under construction at the time for some repairs. So that was completely out of commission. And you know, there is questions. There are a lot of people saying, well, it probably would have made a difference. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't have. But either way, that wasn't available to them at the time. And so the water systems, you know, there will be a lot of scrutiny on that, but that presented a lot of challenges. Now, this isn't the first time that a water system has failed in a scenario like this. Back in 2016, there was a fire up in Fort McMurray, Canada, that obliterated a lot of that city. And in that same scenario, the hydrants failed just due to the large water needs and how much water is being used. And when you have a fire like this, we always see videos of people outside with the fire hose on their roof. You get a fire like this, that's not going to do a thing. It's just too hot. It's too powerful to really stop it. We talked a little bit about urban wildland interface. You know, we had all this dense vegetation close to homes. It talks a lot. I mean, that you look at where people build now as we're expanding, as there's urban sprawl, we're building closer and closer to this vegetation in these areas. It creates difficult terrain to move up and down. You have limited evacuation routes. And then, like we talked about, topography challenges for water disbursement. Trying to pump water uphill while it's being used in thousands of other locations in the city is really hard to do. And then lastly, probably the biggest thing on this was fuel. And when a fire gets like this, the homes themselves become the fuel. It wasn't the trees, it wasn't the vegetation in the end, it was the homes that became the fuel. And you know, what happens in a scenario like this, when you look at the way a home is built now, a large majority of the products in your home, and all our homes, are petroleum based. And so when it gets hot enough, the heat releases the gases. So when a fire burns, it doesn't burn the fuel itself. It burns the gases that are released from the fuel. So as things heat up, they release the gas, and then that's what ignites. So when you have a home full of petroleum products, which we all do, it's anything plastic, anything polyester, a lot of our fabrics, these homes just turn into tinderboxes. And so when the homes become the fuel source, that makes it really, really hard to stop a fire. And that's why you see these homes that are just completely destroyed. It's not just down to the foundation. It's melted cars, melted car rims. It's because the homes themselves became the fuel source. So we talked a lot about the fire, but what we don't talk a lot about is when the cameras go away. And so if you look at the headlines today, you know, how many of the headlines are on the LA fires or the aftermath or what's happening there? I haven't seen very many headlines about that. But here's just a couple of things that they have to deal with. They have toxic ash and debris. They're getting rain now, which on one hand is great because it's helping them mop up the rest of the fire. However, now they have all these barren hillsides. And so now they have to worry about mudslides and erosion and flooding. The air quality has a lot of issues now. You have 200,000 people that were displaced. You have thousands of people that have no home left. It just got destroyed. You have job and economic losses. You have living costs that went up. You look at the rent prices in LA in the last 2 weeks, and they've just skyrocketed. You have mental and physical challenges. You have insurance challenges. Now, every one of us is going to be paying more in our home insurance because of this fire and because of the hurricane. We're all going to feel the pain there. You have community loss. You have people that have lived their entire lives there, sometimes for several generations. Their community has been completely wiped out. Where do they go? What do they do? You have water quality, local government that now has to deal with the aftermath here. You have reconstruction costs, public services distribution. How do they get those back online? You have migration pressure. Where do people go? What do they do? Transportation and logistics. You have health risks from just even being around the burned down the burned down buildings. So there's a lot of things that they have to account for that we don't necessarily see once the cameras go away. But for them, this is going to be a long, long process to build back into something that is livable, something that is usable. And so again, going back to the concept of resilience, if we build that into our processes, into our infrastructure, it's not saying that bad things won't happen, but it helps us have a plan and a framework for when something does happen. We know what to do, or we at least have a game plan. Because the time to start thinking about it is not when the disaster is happening, it's well in advance. Now, there's plenty of things wrong in the world. You have fires, you have hurricanes, you have geopolitical turmoil. There's any number of things. But as Arthur Brooks, he's a professor at Harvard who teaches a class on happiness. And like he says, there's plenty wrong in the world, but acting gloomy won't fix it. So we could be like this guy who, in the middle of the fires, he decides to go surfing because there's nothing else he can do. So here are my economic slides. So kind of tying it back to the fire, for your businesses, understand what your fuel sources are. What makes your business go? What makes it slow down? Now, as we look at the year, look at 2025, the construction indexes look pretty decent. There will be some bumps in the road. We're not going to be on a tear like we had been the last couple of years. There seems to be more of a plateau, a little bit of a pullback. But let's also remember where we've been the last couple of years. As you can see in the Dodge Momentum Index, that's basically an outlook for non-residential construction for the next year. Look at where we were in 2019. That was a pretty good year. And then we had some pullback during COVID, and then this thing just took off like a rocket. So we're still far ahead of where we were in 2019, but it is probably time for a bit of correction in how the markets operate and how they work. But look for growth to come later on in 2025, in the later half of the year. There's improving industrial demand with nearshoring investments. So you're going to see growth from those investments, but you're also going to see increased production capacity once those investments come online. So overall, construction will generally rise. We still have a lot of money in the infrastructure bill and some of the legislation that's been passed in the last couple of years. That's still going to go out and be used. Construction is going to have some mixed results between residential and non-residential. A lot of that is tied to interest rates and what those are going to do. Just like a fire needs the right environment to really take off, we have to understand what our operating environment is. So again, as we look at this year, we're going to continue to have workforce challenges. It's going to be different in past years. Workforce is a little more available right now, but we're still going to see some cost increases, probably not at the same rate that we have the last couple of years. In the construction industry, we've seen about a 5% increase over the last 4 or 5 years. That'll probably slow down a little bit, but there's still workforce challenges that are out there that we need to address and be prepared for. Inflation will increase in 2025. We spent the last couple of years trying to bring that back down to that 2% level. That'll probably start to go back up. And a lot of that is tied to tariffs and geopolitical instability. You can't put tariffs in place without increasing costs, because it is the country that brings it in that has to bear the cost. And whether companies choose to absorb that or pass it on to their customers, that'll be up to them to decide. But at least initially, we will see some geopolitical instability and any cost increases due to tariffs. One of the challenges there is that there's not really a clear picture of what is going to happen on the tariff front. Like I said, I'm in DC right now, and a lot of the meetings we are having are on tariffs. And the common theme is that no one really wants them, but no one really knows what's going to happen. Because there's been a lot of mixed messaging out there of this will happen, that'll happen. Is it a carrot or a stick approach, or are these really going to go? The latest proposal this morning has been a 2.5% global tariff that is going to increase by 2.5% every month. We'll see if that happens or not. We're still looking at potential tariffs of 25% on US or on Canada and Mexico. We don't know if that is really just a kind of carrot and stick for USMCA to get renegotiated, which is up in 2026. But we'll see. We don't know. And so it's hard to really make plans on what to do without knowing what is real or what is just kind of a threat right now. So everyone's kind of up in the air on that. But there will be interest rate, interest rates will stay high relative to where they have been the last couple of years due to U.S. long-term bond yields. And those are influenced by volatility. So the more volatility and stability there is, those bond yields go up to account for that risk. And then the last thing I'll say is that I've heard a lot of people say, well, why haven't mortgage rates gone down? Because the Fed lowered rates. Mortgage rates are tied to the U.S. long-term bond yields, not to the federal funds rate. So if you want to see what mortgage rates are going to do, look at the 10-year bond. That's what's going to tell you more than anything. That is what that's mostly tied to. It's not the Fed funds rate. So overall, not a terrible picture. I think it'll be a decent year economically, but there are certainly some headwinds to account for, and there are a lot of things that we'll find out. A guy I was talking to yesterday, he said with the new administration, there's kind of three ways to look at it. You can love it, you can loathe it, but you can laugh at it because something new changes every couple minutes. And since I've been here the last 2 days, there's been, I don't know, probably 10 new executive orders that change something every couple minutes. So yeah, just a lot going on there. So to wrap up, again, to touch on the concept of resilience. Right now is the time to build resilience into your business, into your organization. So again, it's flexibility, redundancy, diversity, preparedness, and learning. And if you have that idea, that concept, and can build that in, when something happens, not if, when it happens, you'll be much better prepared and in a much better position to adapt to it and to rebound from it. So that's all I have. So again, I appreciate everyone coming to this, the 29th user group. It's been a privilege to be a part of this the last couple of years. We love having Monsen be a part of Campbell companies and having all of you as our customers. And I really, really appreciate your partnerships and everything that you do for us.